A few days ago, Apple announced they will start to send out invitations for their event, which is going to happen on September 9th, 2014. Now that today we are in September and that the event is going to happen in about a week, I would like to do a speculation video about what could possibly happen at the event. And before starting, we're going to mention that this is my own opinion, so you may disagree. And just for this video, I introduced something called the possible counter, so every time I say it's possible or possibly, I add a point in the possible counter. Enough, let's start. Let's start with the thing people are literally ready to sacrifice their family for, the iPhone 6. Every year we get leaks about the upcoming iPhone, but never was it that popular, and some company even did a fake clone based on the leaks. I'm not going to say anything about the iPhone 6 itself to prevent a flame war from starting, but instead I will say how I think the whole thing is going to be organized. Most likely, there is not going to be an extra cheap version of the iPhone, just like the iPhone 5C. First of all, there isn't any point. The reason the 5C was made, as much as I know, is to reduce the cost of the production, since the 5S had almost identical design to the iPhone 5, and since the 5C is made of plastic, it's cheaper to produce than the iPhone 5. Second of all, because the 5S wasn't as hyped as the iPhone 6 or 5, Apple decided to create a phone which is still a new phone, but it used pretty much the same hardware as the 5, and so people were really curious to see what it would look like and would attract non-geeks into the smartphone market. It'll let Apple get a decent amount of money off this. But in this case, the iPhone 6 would certainly be most popular, so Apple wouldn't get as much money for their cheap model. Finally, there's absolutely no leaks about the phone. I haven't even heard anyone speak about it. But who knows, it's possible that it's hidden somewhere in a factory, somewhere where no person can get inside. So, here is my thoughts. The iPhone 6 will obviously be the high-end phone and possibly have its starting price offered 32GB of storage. Seriously, Apple, stop offering high-end phones with 16GB storage. It'll most likely also have a 64GB option and possibly a 128GB option as well, starting at $200 on contract and adding a $100 for each time the storage is doubled. Then, I think that the iPhone 5S will take the spot as the mid-end phone. For me, there is two possibilities concerning the storage. The first one, which will advantage the customers, is to offer the 5S only in a 32GB option for $100. That will make a decent $200 saved, but I wouldn't expect Apple to decide to do such a thing. My second possibility is that Apple will offer the iPhone 5S in only a 16GB format for the same $100. Another thing, Apple would give the option to take the 32GB format, since it would most likely cost the same as an iPhone 6, which would be stupid. As for the low-end phone, I see the iPhone 5C taking the spot. Either it will be available in the 16GB format or an 8GB format. The 8GB format is a possibility because it is available in that format in Europe and the UK. But honestly, I don't like the fact that 8GB phones are still a thing. I mean, first of all, half the storage is taken by the operating system, and second, apps and video are heavy, and you will unconsciously consume the entire storage in days. And of course, the price will be free on contract. Let's move on something else. First, let's talk about the iPods. Based on Apple's pattern, I guess the entire line of iPods is going to be updated. Let's check each one of them. First, there is the Shuffle. It was originally released in 2005 when it was a huge and not compact iPod. It was heavily revised in 2006, and that design was dealt for a long time until another design change was released in 2009. This time people didn't like it because it required you to use Apple's headphones since it didn't have any controls on the iPod itself. Finally, the design we have today was released in 2010 and was slightly revised in 2012. Judging by Apple's pattern, I suppose that there will be a new one released this year. I couldn't find a single concept image about what it could look like, but let's hope for the best. Jumping into the second iPod is the Nano. Just like the Shuffle, the patterns are the ones that let me know that it could be updated this year. They used to always release a new one every year. However, after the 6th generation iPod Nano, which was released in 2010, the next one was released in 2012, skipping 1 year, which is the current model. I suppose that they decided to switch to the 2-year pattern because they mostly spent time working on the iPhone and everything software related. My guess is that it's going to be still very similar to the old model. My guess is that the iPod will, first of all, have an interface similar to iOS 7 and possibly add some more features such as Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi sync, as well as possibly an iTunes Store app. And judging by Apple's easy way of grading their things, they're going to possibly make the screen bigger. Yes, the picture is stretched because I was too lazy to do it properly. One thing I forgot to talk about is the price and storage for each device. I think Apple should keep the $49 price tag of the Shuffle, but double the storage to 4GB. As for the Nano, possibly keep the same price of $149, but also offer a 32GB version for $199. Let's move on to the iPod Touch. Just like the Nano, Apple used to release it yearly, but they stopped doing that since there was no updates to the iPod Touch in 2011 and 2013. I guess it is time for an upgrade, especially considering that the iPod has already a weak processor from the iPod 2 and that it barely runs the beta version of iOS 8. In this upgrade, I expect a thinner and lighter version of the iPhone 6 if the iPod wasn't thin or light enough. Let's check what the 5th generation iPod Touch has in common with the 3 phones at the time. Has a screen of an iPhone 5, a processor of an iPhone 4S, and a camera from an iPhone 4. If we compare the same aspects of the 6th generation iPod to the few phones I mentioned earlier, it should have the screen of an iPhone 6, which means most likely a 4.7 inch, as I doubt will be available in 5.5 inch, the same processor as an iPhone 5S, which means an i7 processor, as I doubt will use an A6 processor since it's outdated already, nor the A8 because it's Apple and Apple is always about saving money. And lastly, the camera of an iPhone 5C and possibly have some features from the 5S because the 5th generation iPod Touch had 1080p recording which wasn't in the iPhone 4. It also took panorama pictures which are only available in the iPhone 4S and further. I guess it will possibly have some tweaks from the iPhone 5S such as burst photos or whatever it's called, in slow motion. As for the storage and price, here's what I think. I guess the older iPod will be available, possibly only in a 16GB capacity for $199 and only is space gray and silver. As for the newer ones, I would prefer if it was only sold in 32GB and 64GB capacity for $299 and $399 respectively, which is the same price as how much the 5th generation iPod cost. Enough of the iPod Touch, let's talk about the one iPod everyone forgot about, the iPod Classic. The latest model available was released in 2009, making the oldest product still available on the Apple Store, excluding maybe the accessories. It has a 160GB hard drive instead of flash memory. It has a direct upgrade from the first iPod released in 2001. This product, although it isn't bad by any means, is very old and sadly does not deserve its place in the Apple Store along with the beautiful colored other iPods. This and the iPhone 4S are the only Apple devices still available that utilize a 30-pin connector instead of the Lightning port. We know that the 4S will be kicked out with the announcement of the iPhone 6, that makes the iPod Classic be the only one left. The other problem is its price. It is priced at $249, which was fine in 2009 but isn't now. So my guess is that they completely will remove the iPod and replace it with something better. I'm gonna call it the iPod Pro. It may possibly be a bigger version of the iPod Nano, but with immensely high storage, this time only flash storage. Here's what I think. A 128GB version will be available for $249 and a 256GB version will be available for $349. And to reduce cost, instead of having one storage chip for the capacity, instead have two of them. That means for the 128GB version, there will be two 64GB chips inside, and pretty much the same thing with 256GB. Alright, I'm enough with that. Here's a few things I think will not be announced. I think that iPads, Macs, and OS X Yosemite are not going to be announced this event, but instead will be announced in October like they always do. Two last things I forgot to talk about. First, iOS 8 will be announced at this event and a release date will be given. Second, the iWatch. The rumors have been so popular about this iWatch. I will not talk too much about it, but I will say the basics. The iWatch will only come in space gray or silver, however the buyer can choose what color he wants for the wristband. It'll have a 1.5-inch touchscreen running a full version of iOS and having an A7 processor. It will not include a camera or possibly just a front-facing camera, so the space will be a choice of 8GB or 16GB. Finally, the price will possibly start at $199 and $299 for the upgraded version. I also think that there will be a model with phone calling and LTE, so for that, simply add a $130 plus to the actual price. Alright, that was intense. So, this is the end of my video. I hope you enjoyed it, so next time I'm going to do a recap video about the event once it happens. If you want to stay updated with future content, please subscribe to my channel. I would like to know your opinion about this, so leave a comment down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.